What up, guys? Today we got a question from Diego, who's having a dilemma that I think a lot of people have in jiu-jitsu, especially higher belts. So he's a purple belt that's been training for about 7 years. He's, inching closer and closer to brown belt. And he says that right now with his training, he feels like he lacks something, and it's slowing his progression down, because when he was a white belt, blue belt, and even into his early purple belt phase of training, he noticed he was getting better faster, and he was also getting destroyed by everybody. He was getting worked, right? Now he's getting closer to brown belt, and he's noticed that, man, I'm not getting worked by everybody like I used to. And I feel like my progress is slowing down because of it. And so his message to me basically is, should he switch gyms to get a better push, or should he change his perspective on training? So brother, thank you for the question. So check this out. I'll draw a parallel with you to lifting, and then we'll get into the jiu-jitsu side of it, and it'll make sense in a second. So with lifting, right? When you first start lifting, and if you've lifted before, you'll probably agree with this. The first time you do like a chest and like a bench press and chest workout, or a leg workout, whatever the workout is, you were incredibly sore, right? You're so sore, and you're sore for 3 days to like a week sometimes. And then as you do it more and more, the strength comes up very quickly, and your soreness goes down pretty dramatically. You don't get sore nearly as long. And then it gets to a certain point where eventually you get to a pretty reasonable, respectable amount of strength, good base under you, and then your strength gains slow dramatically, and you don't get as sore as often, right? And at that point, if you want to get stronger, you have to put a lot of thoughtful effort into the way that you're training to gain even just little incremental amounts of strength. I know that like when I used to be really into bench pressing and powerlifting, I remember going through a program for, it was like 8 weeks. And then I tested my max out on the bench press. It was like I worked for 8 weeks to squeeze out an extra 5 pounds on the bench press. And I got to 365, right? It was a lot of work just to get that little extra 5 pounds. And so again, that's lifting. And a lot of people would agree with that, right? Well, with your jiu-jitsu, it's very similar. When you first start off, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what's going on. You learn a lot of stuff rapidly. It's like drinking through a fire hose, as they say, and you get better very rapidly. Now, a lot of you guys watching this as white belts, you may say, oh, I've been training for 6 months. I'm not getting any better. If you could roll with yourself 6 months ago, you would probably realize how much ground you've really covered. Also, you have to consider you're in a room where everybody's getting better. So again, sometimes it's hard to judge, but you're probably making more ground than you think. And so you get better, faster, better very rapidly. And then what happens, right? You're at this phase now where you've got a pretty good base under you. You're pretty good at jiu-jitsu. You're pretty efficient. You're one of the upper belts in your gym. And as you become an upper belt, those days of you getting smashed by everyone, those are kind of gone. I mean, you'll get smashed by people, sure. I mean, still, I get smashed by certain people. It's not very many people, but there's still some people that can smash me, but they're fewer and fewer and fewer, right? And think about all these different really high-level jiu-jitsu guys. How do they keep improving even though they're the best guy in the room, right? There's things that you have to change as your skill gets better. Because again, you're not going to be able to haphazardly train, go into the gym, get smashed, and improve. Just like with your lifting. When you're very new to lifting, you can haphazardly lift weights, you'll be really sore, and you'll gain strength, but eventually there has to be a much more thoughtful approach, a much more deliberate approach. And so what I would tell you to do, if you were going to be more focused on your training as far as progress, hopefully your coach is already implementing different strategies to, work in some deliberate training into the mix. But if not, look up the term deliberate training. It was popularized by a guy named Dr. Anders Ericsson. It's been around for a while. There's some people that argue with it, but I think it's a good idea. And in my practice, personally, it's been very useful. So with that said, I've had many periods of time where I was the toughest guy in the room, the best guy in the room, right? And I still had to make progress. And this is back when I was a brown belt and black belt. And one of the best things I ever did was to be very deliberate with my training. So this might be very useful to any of you guys that are higher belts. When you're training, instead of just stepping on the mats and like, I'm going to train really hard and associating hard training with good training, it could be good training if you need to improve your cardio or if you're working on something or whatever, but you can get a lot of really good, effective, skill producing training by just being very deliberate. So I could roll with like white belts and blue belts, maybe even some some less experienced purple belts, and I could get a fantastic training session that's going to improve my skill. I had to do this when I was a young black belt as I was improving. So when I would get on the mats, I would work on very specific techniques. If I was working on a particular position, that was my only position I'm using. If I'm trying to improve a particular submission, that's my only submission I use. You could ask my students, a lot of times they know if I'm using a particular technique or if I'm working on something because it's all I'm going to do, right? I'll give up everything else because I'm working on this one thing. And I remember the other day I was like trying to work on an arm bar, and this armbar that I've been trying to improve over the years. And, my student, he already knew what he's doing. He's like, I know what you're after, because they know, because I use it so much, which again, creates new challenges for me. But again, that is what you do as a higher belt. Again, and that doesn't mean that I get smashed by everybody, right? I could get smashed, but again, a lot of times as you become a higher belt, you're going to get smashed less and less and less. And so you have to then add deliberate training into the mix. You have to be very focused with what you're doing. You can't haphazardly step into it and go. So that's the idea, man. Add some focus to your training. Step on the mat with a focus and a purpose as to what you're doing. Stick to that purpose for at least 4 weeks or more, and then see the effects of that. And brother, hope that helps.